Little MAGA girl, denied lunch by leftist cafeteria worker, but a WWII veteran watching everything said. The air inside the cafeteria of Liberty High Middle School was not filled with the warm, comforting aroma of baked bread or the boisterous, carefree laughter of adolescence. Instead, it hung heavy and stagnant, thick with an unspoken tension that tasted like iron and judgment. It was a Tuesday, a day that should have been indistinguishable from any other in the mundane calendar of academic life. Yet for 14-year-old Lisa, it felt like walking the plank of a ship adrift in hostile waters. The school, ironically named after the very concept it seemed intent on suppressing, was a sprawling structure of concrete and glass that felt less like a place of learning and more like an indoctrination center for the new age. A grey monolith where conformity was the only currency accepted. Lisa stood at the far end of the lunch line, a solitary figure of vibrant colour against the drab backdrop of muted earth tones and safe, approved fashion choices of her peers. She was the anomaly, the glitch in the system, the spark that the suffocating blanket of the zeitgeist tried desperately to snuff out. Her outfit was not merely clothing. It was a declaration, a silent anthem woven into cotton and polyester. She wore a bright white t-shirt, pristine and bold, with the word Trump emblazoned across the chest in unapologetic red block letters. Draped over her small, trembling shoulders was a cape fashioned from the American flag, the stars and stripes cascading down her back like a protective embrace from the founding fathers themselves. To Lisa, this wasn't a costume or a provocation. It was her identity. It was the legacy of her grandfather, the stories of the frontier, the pride in a nation that she had been taught to love with a pure, unblemished heart. But here, in the belly of the beast, love for one's country had been twisted into a crime, and patriotism was branded as a provocation. She gripped her plastic tray with knuckles that had turned white from the intensity of her clench. The tray was empty, a hollow rectangle of molded plastic that felt heavier with every step she took toward the serving counter. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat that echoed the fear pulsing through her veins. Lisa had always been a quiet girl, studious and kind, the type who would rescue a stray kitten or hold the door for a stranger. She was not a warrior by nature, but the world had forced her onto a battlefield she barely understood. Her blue eyes, usually sparkling with the innocent curiosity of youth, were cast downward, fixated on the scuffed linoleum tiles of the floor, watching her own sneakers move forward inch by agonizing inch. She could feel the eyes upon her. They were everywhere. The cafeteria was a panopticon of judgment. Hundreds of students sat at the long communal tables, but the usual din of conversation had been replaced by a sinister, buzzing whisper. It was the sound of a hive mind reacting to an intruder. Smartphones were raised like modern bayonets, lenses trained on her, recording her every move, waiting for a slip-up, a tear, a moment of weakness that could be uploaded, edited, and weaponized on social media within seconds. She was content fodder for the digital mob, a target painted in red, white, and blue. Lisa could hear the snippets of conversation as she passed, the cruel giggles, the derogatory slurs that had been repurposed as virtues by the new cultural hierarchy. They called her brainwashed, hateful, and outdated, projecting their own intolerance onto a girl who simply wanted to eat her lunch in peace. The humidity in the room seemed to rise, a physical manifestation of the ideological pressure cooking the air. The smell of overcooked vegetables and industrial cleaning agents mixed with the metallic tang of adrenaline in Lisa's mouth. She swallowed hard, trying to dislodge the lump of anxiety that had formed in her throat. She felt incredibly small, a tiny island of tradition in a rising sea of radical change. The loneliness was profound. In previous years, she might have had friends walking beside her, but the polarization of the times had severed those bonds. One by one, her peers had drifted away, fearful of guilt by association, terrified that standing next to the girl in the MAGA hat or the Trump shirt would mark them for social excommunication. So, Lisa walked alone. Ahead of her, the serving line moved with agonizing slowness. The sneeze guard, a long barrier of plexiglass, separated the students from the cafeteria staff. It was meant to be a hygienic barrier, but today it looked like the glass wall of a visitation room in a prison. Through the smudged and scratched surface, Lisa could see the movement of the workers, ladling out portions of mashed potatoes and grey meatloaf. But her eyes were drawn, with a magnetic pull of dread, to the figure stationed at the very end of the line, right by the register. It was the woman everyone knew only as the activist. She wasn't just a lunch lady. She was a self-appointed guardian of the progressive orthodoxy, a woman who wore her ideology like a weapon. Even from this distance, Lisa could see the flash of purple hair, a violent artificial shade that stood up in jagged spikes. The woman's posture was rigid, aggressive. She didn't serve food. She dispensed judgment. Rumors swirled around the school about her, how she would give extra portions to students who wore the correct slogans and shortchange those who didn't. She was the gatekeeper of sustenance. And today, she was watching Lisa's approach with the predatory focus of a hawk spotting a field mouse. Lisa took a deep, shuddering breath. "Just get the food and sit down," she told herself, repeating the mantra in her mind. Just get the food and go to the corner table. Don't look up, don't engage, just survive. But survival felt like a tall order when the very atmosphere seemed designed to crush her spirit. The flag on her back, usually a source of warmth, felt heavy now, burdened by the scorn of the room. She wondered, for a fleeting, heartbreaking second, if she should have just worn a plain hoodie, if she should have hidden who she was. But the thought was quickly banished by a surge of stubborn pride. Her father had told her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but doing the right thing despite it. Wearing this shirt, loving her president and honoring her country was the right thing. She wouldn't hide. She couldn't. As she stepped closer to the serving station, the noise in the cafeteria seemed to dip, a hush falling over the immediate area. It was the silence of anticipation. The students with their phones nudged each other, sensing that the main event was about to begin. They knew the dynamic, they knew the predator, and they knew the prey. Lisa reached the tray slide. The metal rails cold under her fingertips. She pushed her tray forward, the scraping sound echoing loudly in her own ears. She was now only a few feet away from the station, where the hot food steamed, but the distance felt like miles. She lifted her head slightly, her eyes meeting the scratched plexiglass, and through the distortion, she saw the purple-haired woman stop what she was doing. The woman turned slowly, a ladle dripping with gravy held in her hand like a gavel. Her eyes, rimmed with thick, dark liner, locked onto Lisa's face and then drifted down to the word Trump on her chest. The sneer that curled the woman's lip was visceral, a contortion of pure, unfiltered disgust. Lisa froze. The vulnerability of her position washed over her. She was a child, dependent on the adults in the room for care and nourishment, but the social contract had been shredded. She wasn't a student to this woman. She was a symbol of everything the radical left despised. The safety of the school environment had evaporated, leaving Lisa exposed to the raw elements of political hatred. She stood there, the tray trembling in her hands, a small patriot in a hostile land, waiting for the strike she knew was coming, while the world watched through the lens of a smartphone, hungry for her humiliation. The silence that had befallen the immediate vicinity of the serving station was not the hush of reverence, but the stillness of a predator coiling before the strike. Lisa stood paralyzed, her knuckles white against the plastic tray, the steam from the hot food rising between her and the woman who now loomed like a gatekeeper of moral purity. The woman, whose name tag read Ms. Halloway, but was adorned with so many ideological pins and slogans it was barely legible, leaned forward. Her purple hair seemed to vibrate with the intensity of her disdain, and the rainbow-colored apron she wore, a garment meant to symbolize inclusion, felt in that moment like a uniform of exclusion. "May I please have the meatloaf?" Lisa's voice was a whisper, a fragile sound that barely carried over the hum of the refrigeration units. She tried to offer a polite smile, the kind her mother had taught her was the universal currency of civility. But civility, she was learning, had been devalued in this new economy of outrage. Ms. Halloway did not move to scoop the food. Instead, she crossed her arms, the ladle still dripping gravy onto the counter like a leaking wound. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the Trump lettering on Lisa's shirt as if it were a contagion. "We don't serve your kind here," Ms. Halloway announced. Her voice wasn't a whisper. It was a projection, intended not just for Lisa, but for the audience of students behind her. It was a performance. This cafeteria is a safe space, a sanctuary, and that... She pointed a manicured finger, the nail painted a stark black at Lisa's chest. "That is a symbol of oppression. It is a symbol of hate, and I will not have hate eating from my kitchen." Lisa blinked, the stinging sensation of tears beginning to prick at the corners of her eyes. The sheer illogical cruelty of it struck her harder than a physical blow. "But I'm hungry," she stammered, her confusion warring with her fear. "It's just lunch. It's just a shirt." Just a shirt? The worker's voice rose an octave, cracking with hysterical indignation. She slammed the ladle down into the metal tray of mashed potatoes with such force that a dollop flew up and splattered against the plexiglass sneeze guard, leaving a greasy smear. "That is not just a shirt, that is violence. By wearing that, you are actively harming every marginalized person in this room. You are erasing my existence. You are celebrating tyranny." The cafeteria, sensing the escalation, erupted. The low buzz of whispers transformed into a cacophony of jeers and laughter. The digital eyes of the smartphones moved closer, forming a semicircle of judgment around the trembling girl. "Kick her out!" a boy shouted from the back. "MAGA tears!" screamed another girl, followed by a chorus of cruel, performative laughter. They didn't know Lisa. They didn't know she volunteered at the animal shelter or that she helped her grandmother with groceries. To them, she was a caricature, a two-dimensional villain in their black and white world, and tearing her down was a virtue-signaling sport. Lisa shrank back, pulling the American flag cape tighter around herself. She felt suffocated by the wave of animosity. She looked around for a teacher, a principal, an adult, anyone who would step in and restore order. There were adults present, supervisors monitoring the lunch hour, but they looked away. Some pretended to check their phones, others busied themselves with trivial tasks at the far end of the room. They saw what was happening, but cowardice held their tongues. To intervene would be to risk the wrath of the mob, to risk being labeled sympathizers. So they let the child stand alone. Ms. Halloway, emboldened by the crowd's approval and the administrative apathy, leaned closer to the glass. Her face was contorted, her expression a mask of self-righteous fury. She picked up a tray of lukewarm corn, looked Lisa dead in the eye, and then deliberately turned and dumped the contents into the trash bin behind her. "Oops," she sneered, the sarcasm dripping thicker than the gravy. "Looks like we're out. For you. Maybe if you learn to dress like a compassionate human being instead of a cultist, you'll earn the right to sustenance. Until then, you can feed on your privilege." "That's not fair," Lisa cried out, the dam finally breaking. A single hot tear traced a path down her cheek. "I have a right to eat. This is a school. You have the right to remain silent." The worker roared back, abandoning all pretense of professionalism. She grabbed a metal serving spoon, gripping it like a baton. "You come in here, wrapped in that flag like you own the place? That flag represents slavery. It represents genocide. And you dare wear it in my face? Get out of my line. Get out of my sight." In a fit of uncontrollable rage, the leftist worker swung the heavy metal spoon. She didn't aim for Lisa, but she struck the plexiglass barrier with a violence that shocked the room into a momentary gasping silence. Crack! The sound was sharp and sickening, like a bone snapping. A spiderweb fracture exploded across the sneeze guard, centered right where the woman's fury had impacted. The barrier that was meant to protect had been shattered by the very person claiming to fight for safety. The violence of the act left Lisa trembling uncontrollably. She dropped her tray. It clattered loudly on the floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet that followed the smash. She stood there, hands empty, stomach empty, heartbreaking. The broken glass distorted the face of Miss Holloway, turning her into a fragmented monster of multiple eyes and mouths, panting heavily from her exertion. Lisa felt the weight of the entire world pressing down on her small frame. The ideology had won. The system had turned its gears and crushed her. She was hungry, humiliated, and ostracized, stripped of her dignity simply for loving her country. She looked down at her shirt, the red letters now blurry through her tear-filled eyes. Was she wrong? Was she really the monster they said she was? The gaslighting was intense, a psychological assault designed to make her question her own reality. But as the sobbing girl turned to flee, to run from the laughter and the pointing fingers and the shattered glass, she didn't see the figure rising from a table in the shadows near the exit. She didn't see the hand, gnarled with age and scarred by war, grip the handle of a cane with a force that turned the knuckles white. She didn't see the general, the witty veteran who had been watching the entire spectacle with eyes that had seen the true face of fascism on the beaches of Normandy. He didn't move yet, not fully. He sat like a stone statue coming to life, the ancient engines of justice firing up within him. The storm had broken the girl, but it had woken the giant. Lisa took one step back, her spirit crushed. The laughter of the indoctrinated mob ringing in her ears, unaware that the cavalry was not coming. It was already there. The echo of the spoon striking the plexiglass hung in the air, a jagged sonic scar that marked the absolute nadir of the day. Lisa, trembling like a leaf in a gale, looked at the shattered web of cracks in the sneeze guard, realizing with a sinking heart that the barrier between civility and savagery had just been physically broken. Ms. Holloway, chest heaving with the exertion of her rage, raised the metal spoon again, her mouth opening to deliver the final, crushing verdict. A demand for Lisa to leave, to disappear, to be erased. The mob of students leaned in, their phones eager to capture the moment the little MAGA girl finally broke and fled in shame. But the command never came. "Belay that order!" The voice did not boom like thunder. It cracked like a whip, sharp, authoritative, and utterly undeniable. It cut through the chaotic noise of the cafeteria with the precision of a sniper's bullet, instantly silencing the jeers, the whispers, and the hum of the refrigeration units. It was a voice forged in a different time, tempered in the fires of discipline and hardened by the cold winds of the Ardennes. At the entrance of the cafeteria, standing where the shadows met the fluorescent glare, was General John Iron Eagle Marshall. He had risen. The cane he relied on was no longer a crutch, but a scepter of command. He moved forward, his gait stiff with the arthritis of 90 years, but propelled by a righteous fury that made him seem 10 feet tall. He was a vision from the history books the school had tried to rewrite. His dress, blue uniform, was immaculate, pressed to a razor's edge, the gold stripes on the sleeves gleaming, but it was his chest that stole the breath from the room. It was a galaxy of honor, the Silver Star, the Purple Heart, the Legion of Merit, and above them all, the pale blue ribbon of the Medal of Honor resting against the dark wool like a sacred relic. The crowd of students, who moments before had been a unified wall of mockery, parted instantly. It wasn't a conscious choice. It was a primal reaction to true authority. They scrambled back, lowering their phones, their eyes wide as the old man marched, slowly, painfully but relentlessly, toward the serving line. The silence was absolute, save for the rhythmic thud-click of his boot and cane against the linoleum. He did not stop until he stood directly beside Lisa. He did not look at her yet. His steel-grey eyes, set deep within a face etched with the topography of a century, were locked onto Ms. Halloway like a radar lock. The cafeteria worker, who had been a giant of intimidation only seconds ago, seemed to shrink. She lowered the spoon, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, struggling to process the sudden intrusion of this living monument. Who are you?" she stammered, her voice losing its shrill edge and replacing it with confusion. "You can't be back here. This is a school zone. You need a visitor's pass." "I have a pass," the general growled, his voice vibrating with a low, dangerous rumble. He tapped the Medal of Honor on his chest with a gloved finger. "It was signed by President Truman in 1945, and it grants me the right to stand anywhere on this soil that I bled to keep free, especially when I see a domestic tyrant trying to crush a citizen under her boot." Ms. Halloway's face flushed a deep, angry red. She tried to rally, to summon the ideological buzzwords that usually served as her shield. "I am not a tyrant. I am an activist. I am protecting these children from the hate speech she is wearing. That shirt, that flag, it's violence. I am fighting fascism." The general laughed, a dry, harsh sound devoid of humor. He stepped closer to the shattered glass, leaning in so his face was inches from the fracture. "Fascism?" he repeated, the word dripping with disdain. "Young woman, I have looked fascism in the eye. I smelled its stench in the bunkers of Berlin. I saw it starve children and burn books. I saw it silence opposition with fear and force. And do you know what it looks like?" He paused, letting the question hang heavy in the air. He raised his cane and pointed it not at a history book, but directly at her face. "It looks like a person using their small amount of power to starve a child because they don't like her politics. It looks like a mob laughing at a lone girl. It looks like you." A gasp rippled through the cafeteria. The reversal was total. The general had taken her greatest weapon, her moral superiority, and turned it against her. "How dare you?" Ms. Halloway shrieked, though her voice wavered. "You are just an old, white, angry man. You represent the patriarchy. You represent the system we are dismantling. You don't understand the harm she is causing." "I understand harm," the general interrupted, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "I understand that my friends died on Omaha Beach so that you could have the freedom to dye your hair purple and spout your nonsense without being dragged away in the night. We fought for your freedom of speech, but we also fought for hers." He placed a protective hand on Lisa's shoulder. The girl flinched initially, then leaned into his touch, feeling a stability she hadn't felt in years. "The First Amendment isn't a shelter for only the views you agree with, madam. It is the shield for the views you despise. That is what makes this country exceptional. And you—" He looked at her with profound pity. "You are desecrating that sacrifice with every second you deny this child her meal." "I won't serve her." Halloway spat, digging her heels in, though she was visibly shaking. "I refuse to be complicit in her intolerance. I will not normalize this." The general drew himself up to his full height. The air around him seemed to crackle. He didn't yell. He commanded, "You will serve her, not because you agree with her, but because you are an American. And in this country, we do not starve our political opponents. We do not weaponize food. You will pick up that scoop, you will place the food on a tray, and you will hand it to this child with the respect she is owed as a citizen of this republic. Do it, now." The command was absolute. It wasn't a request, it was an order from a superior officer of humanity. Ms. Holloway looked around for support, but the other cafeteria workers had retreated to the back, terrified. The students were silent, watching with wide eyes. She was alone on her island of rage. Her hand trembled violently. She looked at the general, saw the unyielding resolve in his eyes, the same resolve that had held the line against tanks and tyranny, and she broke. With a jerky, spasmodic motion, she grabbed a fresh plastic tray. She scooped the meatloaf. She added the potatoes. Her movements were angry, rigid but compliant. She shoved the tray through the opening under the shattered glass, sliding it so hard it nearly skidded off the end of the counter. "Take it," she hissed, her voice venomous but defeated. "Take your food, but don't think you've won. I'm reporting this. I'm filing a grievance. You're creating a hostile work environment. I'll have you banned from this campus. I'll go to the school board. I'll go to Twitter. You'll be cancelled before you get to the parking lot, old man. The world has changed, and there is no place for dinosaurs like you." The general ignored her threats as if they were buzzing flies. He looked at the tray, then down at Lisa. The tension in the room began to diffuse, replaced by a stunned, heavy atmosphere. The climax had passed. The dragon had been forced to yield, not by sword, but by the weight of a superior moral character. He gently nudged the tray toward Lisa. "Eat, child," he said softly. "Strength requires sustenance." Lisa looked up at him, her eyes still swimming with tears. But now they were tears of overwhelming gratitude. She took the tray, her hands shaking less now. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, sir." The general smiled, a rare, warm expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He took a handkerchief from his pocket, crisp white cotton, and handed it to her. "Dry your eyes, soldier," he said, loud enough for the nearby students to hear. "Tears are for the fallen. You are still standing, and as long as I have breath in my body, you will never stand alone." He turned his back on Miss Holloway, who was now furiously typing on her phone, undoubtedly summoning her digital army. The institutional threat hung over them like a dark cloud. The battle was won, but the war for the soul of the school and the nation was far from over. The general placed his hand on Lisa's back and guided her toward a table, his cane tapping out a rhythm of defiance against the silence of the room. He had paralyzed the aggressor, but he knew, better than anyone, that the enemy never truly sleeps. General Marshall did not sit immediately. He stood by the table, his hand resting gently on the back of the chair opposite Lisa, acting as a sentry until she had taken her first bite of the food that had been so bitterly contested. Only when she swallowed, the nourishment bringing a flush of color back to her pale cheeks, did the old soldier lower himself into the seat. His movements were slow, governed by the stiffness of old bones, but possessed of a dignity that made every creak of the chair sound like a drum roll. The cafeteria was still unnaturally quiet. The spell of the mob had been broken. The students, stripped of the herd mentality that had fueled their cruelty, were now just teenagers again, awkward, shamed, and silent. Ms. Holloway had retreated into the kitchen, her voice reduced to a muffled, angry murmur as she likely spoke to administrators. But her absence in the main hall felt like a heavy smog lifting. The air was breathable again. "You have a name, soldier?" the general asked, his voice low and gravelly, like tires on a gravel road. "Lisa," she replied, wiping her mouth with the napkin he had given her. "Lisa Miller, sir." "Lisa," he tested the name, nodding approvingly. "A good name. Strong." He leaned forward. resting his clasped hands on the head of his cane. The silver eagle on the handle glinted under the fluorescent lights. "Do you know why I stood up for you, Lisa? It wasn't just because that woman was being a bully. I've dealt with bullies my whole life. I stood up because of what you are wearing on your shoulders." Lisa touched the edge of the flag cape. "Some people say it's disrespectful to wear it like this," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "They say it's tacky or wrong." The general's eyes softened. "The flag is not a piece of cloth, Lisa. It is a living thing. It breathes with the breath of every man and woman who died to keep it flying. It doesn't care about fashion. It cares about spirit. And today, you showed more spirit in this cafeteria than most politicians show in a lifetime." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "They tried to shame you. They tried to make you feel small because you love your country. That is the tactic of the weak. They want you to apologize for your patriotism. Did you apologize?" Lisa shook her head, sitting up a little straighter. "No, sir." "Good," Marshall said firmly. "Never apologize for loving America. Never apologize for wanting it to be strong. The world is a dangerous place, Lisa. I've seen the darkness that waits at the edges of freedom. It wants to consume everything. History, family, faith. People like that woman in the kitchen. They are soldiers of that darkness, even if they don't realize it. They trade freedom for feelings and truth for ideology. But you—" He reached across the table and tapped her hand with a calloused finger. "You are the light. As long as there is one young person willing to wear that name and that flag, the darkness cannot win." A bell rang, signaling the end of the lunch period. Usually this sound triggered a stampede, but today the exit was subdued. Students gathered their trays, casting covert glances at the table where the past and the future sat in communion. A few of them, boys and girls who had been laughing earlier, looked down as they passed, unable to meet the general's gaze. The shame was the beginning of their education. General Marshall stood up, wincing slightly as his knee protested, but he waved away Lisa's offer of help. "I can manage, my dear. We all have our burdens to carry." He adjusted his cap, squaring it perfectly on his head. "Walk with me." They walked together toward the exit, an odd but majestic pair, the 90-year-old warrior in his dress blues and the 14-year-old girl in her superhero cape. As they moved through the corridor, the crowd parted for them, not out of fear this time, but out of a newfound, grudging respect. The general's presence had sanctified the space, reminding everyone that there were things in this world more important than social media clout or political correctness. There was honor. There was duty. At the double doors leading to the school courtyard, the general stopped. The afternoon sun was blazing outside, bathing the concrete in a golden glow. "I must go my way now," he said, turning to her. "My platoon is waiting. In the memories I keep." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object. He pressed it into Lisa's palm and closed her fingers over it. She opened her hand. It was a challenge coin, heavy brass, worn smooth by time. On one side was the emblem of his division, on the other the simple inscription, "Freedom is not free." "Keep it," he commanded gently. "When they come for you again, and they will, hold on to that. Remember that you are part of a long line of patriots. You are not alone, Lisa. You have an army of ghosts standing right behind you, cheering you on." Lisa looked up at him, her heart swelling with a pride so fierce it felt like it might burst. "I won't let you down, General, I promise." "I know you won't," he said, and for the first time he gave her a sharp, crisp salute. Lisa instinctively straightened her back and returned the salute, clumsy but sincere. The general turned and walked out into the sunlight, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the pavement, a fading echo of a glorious past. Lisa stood in the doorway, the coin clutched tight in her hand. the flag on her back fluttering in the warm breeze. She wasn't just a girl in a cafeteria anymore, she was a guardian. The tears were gone, replaced by a steely resolve. The leftist had tried to break her, but instead she had forged her. Lisa smiled, took a deep breath of the free air, and stepped forward into the light.